Hello, greetings and welcome, my dear listeners. My name is Heretical Hatter, and I welcome you to the 9th episode of my little series, The Tau Empire Reimagined. And today, we will be talking about the second great colonization, the second golden age of the coalition. I record this episode right after the last one, so I apologize if I don't address something here which you will address in previous episode. I hope that this episode will be a little bit shorter than the other ones, as while there are things to talk about, there isn't really that much compared to the Age of War in the previous episode. Well then, I better stop stalling. The second golden age of the coalition, one which lasted for quite some time. It started in 323 Millennium 39 and ended in 666 Millennium 39. I am quite sure that the ominous number of 666 doesn't have any meaning in 40k Galaxy. No, none at all. From the Tau calendar perspective, the second great colonization lasted from 4192 to 4613 era of Unity. So, a little bit over 300 Terran years and a little bit over 400 Tau years. Quite a lot of time, that must be said. I mean, looking at the scale of expansion of colonization achieved in this moment of their history is just mind-boggling. You will see on the map quite soon enough that the difference between the beginning of the third sphere of expansion and what was achieved by the end of the second great colonization is just amazing. Not only a lot of species were convinced or coaxed to join the coalition, but also the colonization effort itself was just really good in this era. What is also interesting that from perspective of history, it's one of the periods when Ethereals had surprisingly a small amount of control. You would think that taking over the Osten Sea Council and then managing to convince the Krut to join the coalition would strengthen their position, and in many ways they kept their dominance. However, spreading out so fast, especially in this era when more and more races were joining the coalition, spread also their influence. And so, Zoats especially started to gain prominence within the coalition. Again, one of the things that I absolutely hate about the Tau Empire lore is total lack of agency of member species of the Tau Empire. This is not the case here. Old members of the Alliance and all members of the Ostency Council, both factions which were taken over and fused into this new coalition, started to gain more and more influence within this coalition. They weren't strong enough to challenge Ethereals yet, but they were gaining more and more influence. In fact, you can see a formation of semi-factions or political factions within the coalition in this era. And there were three camps, basically. There were Ethereals and their lackeys, basically the orthodoxy of the greater good, if you could call it that, and the main power, the main leaders of the coalition. The second camp were psychic species of the coalition. Here Zoats really took the lead, because they had advantage over Ethereals. Being, psychic, they had abilities which were unreachable for the Tau, for the Ethereals. In this era, research of anomalies within the coalition space and warp in general became more acceptable. Disclaimer, when I say research, I am not talking about some kind of creating of demonic engines. It was more subtle than that. All species or psychic species that are within coalition are quite aware of dangers of a warp. So it's a more pragmatic research, if you can say that. Looking into possible dangers, possible ways of communication, of navigation, etc., etc. And the third camp was basically, we want the best for our people. I will be supporting the side that keeps coalition, cohesive, united, and peaceful. And, to surprise of everyone, Krut, for example, and Talarians were most dominant representatives of those factions. The Ethereals still had dominance, but their power wasn't as strong as they hoped. But outside of politics, I would like to tell you about a certain reform to the military. As you probably remember from the last episode, Commander Stormtide breached the Perdus Rift and helped the Krut without clear logistic lines. She managed to score a great victory and save the Krut, but paid her own life for this victory. However, the tactic itself of sending a military force to strike far from the coalition borders, outside of normal logistic lines, had its merits. And so, a new branch of the military was created. For those who don't remember, to this point, the coalition had two main military branches: the self-defense forces and the protection forces. Self-defense forces speak for themselves. This is an equivalent of Imperium of Man's militia and system fleet. They are tasked in protecting the system or the planet they are stationed on. Their fleets usually don't have FTL engines and are mostly composed of space stations and defense platforms. The protection forces are the proper military, the proper army and the navy of the coalition. Those are the fleets that have FTL, those are armies that have not only heavy vehicles, heavy tanks, but also battlesuits in general, which aren't really seen in the self-defense forces most of the time. Maybe some outdated models, but even that is pushing it. Now, however, there was a concept for another force, the Liberation Forces. As you probably guessed, I'm keeping with the naming system. Self-defense forces, protection forces, liberation forces. Someone is self-righteous prick. But yeah, liberation forces. Liberation forces are the elite military units. We are talking about the best of the vessels that the coalition can produce, that can operate far from borders and can punch far harder than their protection navy counterparts. In terms of ground forces, oh boy. If protection army is like equivalent of army, then liberation ground forces is a mix of marines and paratroopers combined. When the protection army mostly uses vehicles, the liberation army will be battlesuit focused. We are talking better armors, we are taking better weapons, we are talking experimental weapons, we are talking far better battlesuits. And you must remember that better military units and better battlesuits aren't limited to just Tau. All member species of a coalition got for that higher level of elite forces as well. So, if you want a paratrooper, Tarelian or a Kroot who is using a battlesuit, you will find them in the liberation forces. And just like you could imagine, a mix of marine and paratrooper makes them extremely deadly. By all accounts, those motherfuckers have more in common with Tempestus Science than normal Imperial Guard, both with training and equipment, especially equipment. As you probably guessed already, this is also my little bit in regards of armies which could be played on the tabletop. You know, Imperium of Man is a great faction and they have numerous armies. They have Astartes, they have Sisters of Battle, they have Imperial Guard, they have Custodians, they have Great Knights, they have Imperial Knights, they have Inquisition, they have Assassins, and more fancy toys. The Eldar are divided between the Craftworlders, the Drukhari, and the Clowns. The Chaos have Chaos Space Marines and Demons. Even though the Chaos Guard, the Dark Mechanicum, hell, Chaos Mutants and Chaos Xenos could be also a nice addition. Not even mentioning the Exodites for the Eldari. And then there is everyone else. The Orcs are Orcs, the Necron are Necrons, and the Tyranids are Tyranids. And there is Tau Empire, which is Tau Empire. So this little bit allows to create multiple armies for the Tauva coalition, which would be the main faction. What armies? Well, you heard. The protection forces would be more vehicle-focused and infantry-focused army, like more closely resembling the Imperial Guard, but with the Tau spin on it. The second army would be the Liberation Forces. And this is more closely resembling the classic Empire army, so battlesuits galore. And there should be the third, which could be used either as independent or being joined with other two armies. And I'm of course talking about the auxiliaries, the other member species of the coalition. Do you need melee? Fine, just sprinkle some Tarelians or Krut, or maybe even Morelians here and there. Do you need Psykers? Domati and Zoats are present. Do you need flying units? Well, we will get to flying Xenos and other fun stuff later. But yeah, that's my idea. Forgive me my ramblings, I hope you see that this little series expands not only concepts regarding the Tau lore itself, but also the lore of member species of my new created coalition, but also the concept how this faction could be played on the tabletop, in a way that you could enjoy it. The greatest sin of the Tau Empire army was the lack of variety in terms of playstyle. It was just gunning the enemy and that's it, you can't really do anything else. And even as a Tau player, I understood the hate. That's a reason why half of my army were the fucking Krut, because it was more fun, not more efficient or better for the gameplay on my side, but it allowed the players to have more fun in general. And this system would allow this, that you have your either vehicle army with infantry or battlesuit army, and you can sprinkle in, or hell, run as independently the member species of the coalition. With a number of models, Games Workshop most likely wouldn't run with this idea, but a man can hope. Alright, let's get back to the main topic, the expansion. And with that, what races were encountered during this era? So, in this age, 10 species were encountered by the coalition. Here I will describe only 4 of them, so I'm keeping the number quite low, mostly for other people to think about possible new species. So, let's talk about the first species encountered by the coalition, the Traxians. Now, to say that the Traxians are a unique species within the coalition would be a bit of understatement. They are very small, flying reptilian species. In fact, the wingspan of the biggest of their kind doesn't exceed 30 centimeters in length. So they are quite small, a pocket Xeno, if you will. They come from the planet of Kwa So. And when Coalition found them, they were on the technological level of a Stone Age. Ironically, quite similar to the Vork. Which is ironic because the biggest member species of the coalition and the smallest both were found or encountered when they were at the level of the Stone Age. And similarly, at the start they weren't recognized as a sapient species. Because, well, it's really hard to imagine such small creature to be fully sapient and have a form of civilization and language. Additionally, the Traxian were very careful to not be spotted, they weren't the top predator on their planet. They were quite similar to the humans in our early or very early history. Just like us, they were prey, and they spent quite a lot of time hiding and being sure not to be found by the predators. So, a giant spaceship which landed on the planet and let out a Titan-sized Xeno, a Vorg, to help in construction of a colony scared the ever-loving shit out of them. I mean, if the Tau landed on Earth today and deployed Vorg to create a colony, I would shit my pants as well. I mean, who wouldn't? The contact was established by a chance, when the young ones of the Traxians got curious, wandered into camp, and were captured by local scientists who in shock discovered that they were talking to each other. A bit of linguistic research followed, and it was confirmed. The Traxians were fully sapient species. And the coalition felt really fucking awkward that it happened second time. For a second time they landed on a planet with a sapient species on the level of a Stone Age, and it took them quite a lot of time to recognize that they were sapient. So, a bit embarrassing for them. But they were quickly to fix the situation. They made contact with the Fraxians and started to talk with them. It didn't really take long for the Fraxians to be convinced to join the greater good. Hell, the proposition, hey, you're not going to be eaten by the predators anymore with help of our technology, was basically enough for them. A somewhat of cult of the greater good as a religion appeared on the Traxian homeworld, but it was allowed to, well, exist. Which is a good example of ethereals losing their grip on power. The greater good wasn't merely an ideology, a philosophy anymore. A form of primitive religion or primitive cults started to appear throughout the coalition, and the Fraxian was just one example of many. And some of you might think that, well, fun, Fraxians are now part of a coalition, but they seem just inconsequential. They are so small, so weak. What could they possibly add into the coalition? Oh, I have a nice thing to tell you. Because Fraxians became very good friends with Aircast. Hell, their culture, their nature of being rather quiet and seclusive worked really well together with Aircast, who were quite similar. And guess what? Being a flying creature gave them ability to figure out three-dimensional flight quite easily. What I'm saying is, Fraxians became secondary pilots for vessels of the Aircast. And this image, which you have right now in your head, of the Aircast pilot walking out of his vehicle with little flying dinosaur or pterodor, whatever the fuck it's called now, just hanging on his shoulder and just chilling. Because no, this isn't a pet. This is my friend Jim. Jim is my secondary pilot. Imagine the very first interaction between, for example, some representative of the Imperium and the Earthcast pilot who has a Traxian friend on his shoulder. Well, that's a weird-looking pet now, isn't it? That's not a pet. That's Jim. Hello! I don't know if you laughed, but it was hilarious to me, so, Scenes like that would give so much soul into a story. Just confusion and this clash of cultures between the mad and tyrannical Imperium, where Xenos and mutants are just slaughtered, and the Coalition, where you have a human-size Earthcast and a dog-size Xeno being co-workers and just hanging out despite how different they are to one another. Also, I would really like to see an Imperial just screaming in terror when he figures out that the pet can talk in pure Gothic. The Phyrexians are small, not stupid. Now, the second species or race found by the Coalition in this time were Mechans. The Mechans are interesting because they aren't Xenos. They also aren't human mutants. They are Up-humans and creators of the Mechian Commonwealth situated on Meku, the capital of their little empire, which counted 17 worlds. What is fascinating about the Mechians, however, is that originally they were nomadic people. Yes, they didn't have a system. They were traveling through the dark void of space, using many massive vessels which were built during the Age of Strife, millennia ago. They were basically jumping into a system, gathering what was needed for theirs to survive and expand their power, and moved on. In a strange way, they resemble Eldar Craftworld. Of course, their home vessel, the Bringer of Hope, isn't as massive as a Craftworld, but it was a sizable vessel, still, enough to hold quite a big population. Not as fancy as Craftworld, but still quite impressive vessel. They were nomads, traders, warriors, but above all they were people who loved freedom. And during their travel, they heard information about growing empire with an autocrat, a dictator, an emperor trying to unite and subjugate all humans in the galaxy. The Mechians were quite sure they were next on the chopping block, so they jumped into the warp and made a really long jump, unknowingly getting lost in the warp for a very long time. In fact, they exited the warp merely 1,000 years ago. Or rather, some power ripped them out of the warp from this realm in which they were lost for so long. For them, decades passed within those vessels in which they traveled. In the real space, millennia have passed. And they were thrown next to a perfectly habitable planet they named Meku, and decided to finally settle down. mostly to the damage that was inflicted upon the Bringer of Hope, these massive vessels in which they traveled through a void of space. This giant vessel, which was basically a holy site and a homeworld for them, landed on Meko, never to rise into the space again, and became the heart of their growing civilization. It didn't take long, but they colonized their first world and started to show their true talent as shipbuilders, and started slow colonization and expansion through the stars. And then, finally, they made contact with the Coalition. Remember, even though those are subhumans, they do have records of the Age of Strife, so they are fearful of the Xeno. But they weren't so aggressive to start a war, especially because in the past they could run. Now they couldn't. They found their haven, the place where they felt safe, and they wanted this to last. So watercast diplomats didn't sleep working with Mechans. They ensured the peace, the non-aggression pacts, the trades, bettering the relationship throughout the years and decades, and even over a century of those relations before Mechans even started to consider joining the Coalition, which they did by the end of the second golden age of the Coalition. An important addition that must be said. Mechans were, and still are to this day, amazing shipbuilders. You know, when you're a nomadic faction and the vessel in which you travel determines if you live or get eaten by fucking demons, helps a lot with getting really fucking good in creating and taking care of void-capable vessels. And Mechans were, without a doubt, the greatest shipbuilders the Coalition ever met. I mean, even Earthcast couldn't hold a candle to those guys. Also, the Mechans are a creation from my other projects, and as you probably noticed by the art I'm using, I am not sorry about fucking anything. I am the heretical Hatter, and heresy and madness is my meat and wine. And I have enough of it to share with all of you. Don't you dare kink shame me. It only makes me stronger. Now, where were we? Ah, yeah, another species. A fun one, I promise. Not lewd in any way. The Reichi. Another race which I recycle from my other projects. But they are a bit different compared to the Mechans. Because the Reichi are the definition of fuck around and find out. Their homeworld, Raid, originally was a verdant, heavy gravity world with a shitton of megafauna and megaflora, full of diverse and dangerous life. Think about it as a mix of Pandora from Avatar, and like 1/10 or maybe even less of danger of Katachan. Probably less. I mean, Katachan is really fucking dangerous. So yeah, something like this. Pandora from Avatar, but even more deadly. And Reichi evolved on this planet to become what can only be described as ultra predators. We are talking about a warm-blooded species which shares characteristic with reptilians and primates. This tail you see? This is so dexterous and so strong, it can be used as a fifth limb. They are 4 meters tall and strong enough to easily challenge an Astartes, and fast enough to do so as well. They are the ultra predators. They are the danger. The Astartes were made to kill. Like, this is what the Emperor feared, what the Xenos could do when they reach the stars. What those monsters could do if they have a high technology to even more boost their natural biology. However, the Reichi never reached the stars, because they blasted themselves with nuclear weapons and turned their planet of Pandora from Avatar into fucking Fallout New Vegas. Which, of course, means that more death and more bullshit in terms of tribes and fall of technology and history and civilization and other bullshit. And on top of all that, 12 years before Coalition made contact with them, the fucking orcs found them. The orcs who found Reichi to be really good sports in fighting, in using choppas, dakas, and beating each other to death. They were enslaving the Reichi, but Reichi were also really good at fighting back, at creating underground forces and trying to regain their planet. The Coalition found them and sent one of the first official liberation forces. It was like a version 0.001 like of this force, like they only began construction it, and it was like very first test they ever had. But even with that, the forces of orcs on the planet were quite small, and the raid was liberated. After that, Reichi joined the Coalition and accepted the greater good really quickly. The Coalition not only purged the orcs, but started the process of healing and terraforming Raid back to its glory of this verdant world, and started to heal the damages of DNA that Reichi had in regards of nuclear and biological weapons, which, well, were used in the apocalypse, which destroyed the world. Soon the Reichi will take the same place as Talarians and the Krut, as really elite ground forces of the Coalition. And the last species to talk about today are Zentra, from planet Zeit. Zentra were quite advanced species when they were discovered by the Coalition. In fact, they were united. All 8 worlds which they were in control of, they had Hashun conglomerate. You could probably guess that they were a mega corporation, a megacorp empire. Apparently being a mix of lizard and a primate with 4 arms and quite good ability to build things makes you quite clever. And those were the most clever of the Zentras figured out that creating a mega corporation which took control over everything was the best way to get rich. And they did. So, in short, they were a cyberpunk species that actually managed to reach new star systems. And the Zentra, this Hashun conglomerate, was more than happy to establish trade with all members of the coalition. After all, blood of slaves, hard work of our precious workers is important and must be compensated by our ability to sell goods, very create. Yes. The money we get from the goods we sell definitely go into our workers. Yes, definitely. And Hashun conglomerate was happy with trading, but was also quite sure that they had no fucking chance fighting against the coalition. They were 8 worlds in tops, and the coalition had a little bit more. But the coalition didn't want to start a war with the conglomerate, so they chose a better way. You know, one of the greatest powers that the Tau have is not in the fire warriors and their skill in war, not in Earthcast and their ability to pilot vessels, not in the Earthcast in their research and building, not even in Ethereals and their ability to manipulate, but in Watercast. People that with charisma can make entire worlds change their allegiance. And you know what? A bunch of starving workers who are exploited by the upper class were quite happy to hear about the ideas of a greater good. The coalition isn't a communist state, but that doesn't mean that they won't support a workers' revolution. Yes, my dear listeners, the Hashun conglomerate was abolished by the rising rebellion of the lower classes, and the Zentra Confederation was created, one which was more than happy to join the coalition as a full member. After all, why wouldn't they join the coalition? The coalition founded the rebellion and helped them with getting their hands, all 4 of them, on guns. 8 worlds, taken into warm embrace of a greater good, with not a single drop spilled from any soldier of the coalition. A tactic which will be used in the future and will be reason why Imperial Inquisition will mark the Watercast as the most dangerous assets of the Tauva coalition. Now, we talked about the races which joined the coalition during the Second Golden Age. Now I will tell you about 8 Sept Worlds which were established in this era. I will do my best to keep it short. The very first Sept World we will talk about is Holos. Sept World established on the other side of the Perdus Rift. It worked as a lighthouse, which was most closely connected with Terraos Sept World on the opposite side of the Perdus Rift. Those two septs worked really closely to keep a navigational route through the Perdus Rift open to all vessels of the coalition. In fact, the Holos acted as a beacon, as a lighthouse. Nothing similar to Astronomicon, so don't panic, the coalition didn't figure out such technology yet, but they were sending signals and just helping with navigation in this region and were keeping, vessels en route, making sure that the connection between one and the other side of the coalition was kept throughout the ages. The next Sept world is Zervera, and it's a sept established within the Crute space. Basically an industrial world which main goal was to help rebuild and boost industry of the Crute space. The Crute were far from the heart of the coalition, and with Perdus Rift, sending resources and goods was difficult. So Zervera was created to just create the same goods from the resources gathered within this region of space. For many, this became something like a secondary capital of the coalition on the other side of the Perdus Rift. The next Sept world is Sha Nor, one established near the Thraxian homeworld, right in the gap between the Frozen Storm and the Perdus Rift. And this Sept world is basically dedicated to the Earthcast and the Navy of the coalition. Not only it was keeping eye on the Frozen Storm, but also on any potential dangers coming from this side of the galaxy. Also helped with navigation, but not too much. Next Sept world is Kork An, a Sept world established near Reit, the Reichi homeworld. Basically a sept dedicated to boost the security in the region, as for the Reichi are a good example, orcs were present in this region of space, so this was like a guardhouse in this region of space. T-Lit is another Sept world, but this one was established as a trading sept with Mechian Commonwealth. Soon it became a very important naval, military and trading world. For a very long time it was a border sept, one which was basically a first line of the defense of the coalition from the side of the Mechians, if they decided to go to war with them. But they didn't. So it was just a standard sept in terms of old border sept, which became more like connection and logistics sept. Next we have two septs established near Old Hashun conglomerate. The Taura was a trading sept located from the eastern side of the conglomerate. And its brotherly sept, Seanoi, was from the galactic south. Those two septs not only encircled, in a way, the space of the conglomerate, but also secured the Broken Heart, the main anomaly within the very center of this region of space. And lastly, we have Zeun, the Sept World established between Sept of Shanor and Korg-An. As you see on the map, there was a little bit of gap between Shanor and Korg-An. It left almost an open way all the way to the region of the second sphere of expansion. So Zeun was a Sept World established to guard this region of space and ensure that there were no holes in the defenses of the coalition. So, looking at everything together, what is the state of the coalition by the end of the second golden age? They have 38 members, 383 worlds, and 32 septs. The number of worlds which was within the coalition grew to almost 100 more since the end of the continuation war. This was the peak of the golden age for the coalition. They managed to welcome 10 new members into the coalition. And with the worlds who they colonized and which belonged to the new members who they welcomed, they grew almost 100 worlds within a span of 400 Tau years. True golden age. The coalition felt unstoppable. Since their victory over those cursed orcs, they were just keep pushing forward and forward and forward. They weren't slowing down. Some believe it was unstoppable momentum. Many thought that they would reach all the way to the edge of the sphere of warp storms within few centuries, maybe even sooner. The coalition was one and true power in this region of space. There were no foes that could stand against them. Or so they thought. The Milky Way galaxy is a cruel place, and members of the coalition were blind and deaf to its reality. For when they were looking up into the sky, they saw stars, a hope for new colonies, for expansion, for progress. They failed to look into the dark void, the void that was looking at them. And if they listened, they would hear it, the laughter of a thirsting god. thoughts. Well, that's it for today. Oh yes, I am ending on a cliffhanger of all places. Also, this episode turned out to be a bit longer than I expected, so yeah, that's also a thing. Either way, that's it. In next episode, we will see what grim darkness of this galaxy has to offer to the Coalition. Thank you for joining me today, and I hoped you enjoyed. Now, my dear listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself while you can. I wish you most heretical day. Ta-ta!